Hello everyone, how you doing today? Thought I'd get block tutorial part 3 going and with a couple other things I wanted to show too. One has to do with how to rotate a creation that was built backwards from the core block. It came up in comments and it's a little tricky, but actually, you know what? I'm gonna start with that real quick. So I set up a test example of that scenario. And basically, if you can see down below here, the core is for a CV was placed, and you can see that the arrow's pointing that way. So this technically is the front of the ship. But I screwed up and I started building it the opposite direction. I actually did this once in with one of the builds too. I think it was actually like the Carapace C3. I think I screwed that up and like started building it backwards for who knows what reason. And I was like, oh no, I didn't realize it until I placed the pilot seat, and it was naturally facing the other direction. So I rotated around, thinking, well, maybe that'll fix it. Nope, it's still messed up. So basically, to fix this problem, it's kind of, at least on the way I know. Now, I suspect maybe there's a console command or some other way of doing this that might be easier. But this is the way I know that does work. And let me show you what I'm going to do. Basically, the principle is I need to first make a copy of what I've got for ship. So I'm going to get into the end key tools. I'm going to select this entire ship first. And the idea is I need to copy it to another location first and then remove the one that's here. If you don't copy it to another location, you'll lose all your data basically, because when you actually copy this, it only remembers the bounding box. So if you remove the blocks that are in that area and you go to paste it, nothing will happen. So I'm going to take this entire structure here and I will say copy. If I say cut right now, I'm dead in the water. I lose all my information. I did that once before too. Actually, about a year and a half ago, my first attempt at an alien ship. I was about an hour into it. I decided I wanted to make a drastic change. I took the whole ship and I went to cut, and then I went to paste it back in without saving it first, and nothing would paste back in, and I lost the entire structure. So don't do that. Okay, so basically I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste. What I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to paste this somewhere else. I don't care where. I drag it over this way for a little ways, as long as it's out of range of that one. So I will paste it here. Okay, so now we have a copy. So what I'm going to do now is take my original selection box, or reselect, whoops, wrong button, reselect this box here. Now I want to get rid of this box, so I'm going to cut, or I'm not going to cut, I'm just going to delete everything that's here. So bam, my original ship is now gone. All I have is this other one over here. So what I will do now is get this selected again. So in this case, I'm just going to redrag the box right over to where the other one was. Now I'm going to do another copy. And then I'm going to do another paste. This time though, I'm going to take my pasted version and I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. Like that. So I don't know exactly where the center point used to be, but I'm probably a little bit close. I don't think it necessarily matters though. So I will just drag it over here. I'll paste this one. And now I will get rid of the copied version I had over here. And at this point in time, one last thing that's probably going to have to take place is, you notice how this shows in red now, is I would have to get into the P menu under main and switch the faction to private. So at this point, this should be technically facing the correct direction. And it doesn't matter what that original arrow said. Basically, the whole thing was flipped 180. So that is how I have learned to do it. Whether that's the best way or not, I couldn't say. It doesn't take that long typically, depending on the creation. I mean, it's pretty much the process of making first a copy of it, pasting it somewhere else, getting rid of the original, pasting the rotated version back where the original one was, and then getting rid of the copied one, and then you seem to be okay. So that is that. Now one other thing before I move on, here is something new I was kind of tooling around with last week. Didn't really mean to build a whole nother ship right now, but the idea of this one is to support the Creel faction, possibly an AI-controlled ship, kind of like a CV gunship. And that's what this is. It's a combat steel creation. It's got quite a lot of turrets on it, some more on the sides, a couple on the bottom. I'm lacking a lot of the bottom of the ship right now, and I don't necessarily have all thruster placements finalized yet, or know exactly what thrusters I'm going to have on here, but I did sneak some in for most of the directions right now. But yeah, kind of fun build there. All right, so back to this block thing here. Basically, on part 3, what I really wanted to do is kind of show you some usage of blocks and how to detail things, existing structures, and whatnot with blocks. So over here, I got another example. This, let's just say this is a corner of my base that I built. Now it's not textured or anything right now. It's mostly full blocks. I even put in a little bit of wedge blocks here and a little bit on the corner there, but it's mostly full blocks. And basically, I want to make this prettier. I want to add in more complexity to it. And the way I see it, when you're dealing with full blocks, or a wall in general, there's two main options. One option would be to replace these blocks with other blocks that kind of cut into it, so kind of like indent into the wall. So let's do a little example of that here down on the on this bottom row here for the outside. Let's say that I'll just count out, say 3 here, and yeah, put another little hole there. Let's say we want to keep these particular pillar beams like that, and we want to do something now with the inside of this. There are so many options, it's ridiculous on what you can do with this. Basically, any block that covers the whole wall of any variation on one side of it, like I want the inside wall here to be solid, I don't want to have holes in it. You just use a block that has a full wall on one side and not on the other side, and you just kind of make some patterns out of it, basically. So in this case, let's just say I did something real simple here. We'll run a couple of those over here, and then maybe I pop in a half block. So now we've got this little indent over there. Doesn't cost any more for the creation to do this. And I still got a full intact wall on the inside. Now granted, anytime you're not dealing with a full block, you're going to have less hit points on these blocks. So like a full block of combat steel that I'm using is 2,000, half block is 1,500, and I think, I believe that's the lowest it will go is 3/4 of the full hit points. But before I move on, I'm going to take a super scrawny block here and just see how many hit points that has. No, I guess it does drop down. So it looks like it would get to, well, this is just over 1,000. This is one of the smallest blocks you could have. So it will reduce the hit points, but not entirely, not proportionally. Like this particular block here is probably about 1/36 of what a full block is, something like that. Probably actually more than that. What is that? 1, 2, 3. Whatever. I don't want to do the math, but it's a lot weaker. But it's still half the hit points, believe it or not, as the full block, even though it's like way less in actual mass. So this was one option here. On this other chunk here, let's say I want to do something different. So I go to another block that has a full back on it, and like this here, and we can just like rotate this around one way or another. I've done the same thing on my builds a lot too. So not really anything new there. So I'm just kind of picking different blocks and just making a pattern, more or less. Whether you like the pattern or not, it does add a lot more to look at in the actual creation. So that is one way to do things, and I typically do that with everything. If it's got full blocks around, and there's a purpose, you know, it's visible to the player either on the inside or outside of the base, I do try to mess with those blocks to add in some kind of detail. Now this is one way of doing it. This is the indentation method. The other method is adding blocks over the top of it. Now of course this will cost you more in your build creation if you do it this way. And as an example of that, let's say I wanted to get some trim or something over here. Let's say I like pop that there, this here, and then grab like these little skinny blocks here and dump a couple of those in. And you kind of get the idea. Or I could go a little more extreme here and actually build up like a block row over the other one with some other variants of blocks like that. As you can see, it adds a lot more depth into it, and I definitely like that. Like say you have this big flat area of nothing. Sometimes just adding a little something to it will do wonders for it. Like say take one of these little thin blocks like this here, and I just kind of like put a couple of these over here and in the center. So I do something like that. I don't know. Again, unlimited variations of what you can do with this kind of stuff, but it definitely got a lot of possibilities though. So you kind of see I don't necessarily particularly like my pattern I got going on here, but you can see a good idea of what you could do to make stuff go over it. Now when doing this, keep in mind though that you can do things you can do both of them at the same time as well. So I've got a row of like added blocks here for detail, but I didn't touch the blocks behind it yet. So technically I could cut those out as well and do something else with them. You know, whatever that might be. Say I wanted to get some pipes in there with a full back on it, and I don't know, some wedge block here. So now we've got all this going on in that same area. Obviously a whole lot more detail than what it used to have. And this is just a method I would personally do with every creation that you make that might have this kind of issue. You know, well, I wouldn't say issue, but just solid walls of nothingness. Interior as well. Now interior space, if you take a look at the screen, like a standard 16:9 display or whatnot, if you take and look at the areas of the screen you're actually seeing, you will notice that the bulk of what you're seeing is actually the floor and ceiling. It takes up more screen space than the walls, you know, at least in this view on a standard size room. So these areas are just kind of like areas that are highly visible, that I do see a lot of creations that just don't seem to do anything with them. You know, if you got a flat ceiling that stays pretty much flat, maybe there's a light there or something like that. To me, I just think, wow, that's a lot of space that you could do something with to enhance the looks of it. And I'm sure you've seen this on most all my creations. If you take a look at like any of the hangars and things I've done with big open areas, they typically always have something going on in the ceiling. And I do that obviously purposefully. It usually doesn't serve any practical purpose besides to look nicer. So same method there. I basically will take a chunk of the ceiling out and come up with some kind of block combination or pattern to try to make that look prettier. Sometimes simple, sometimes a little more complicated, all depends what I feel like at the time. Like for here, I took those out, put in some half blocks in the center, some wedges on the corner, and some thin blocks in the middle. And now we've got kind of some kind of beam looking structure. And again, almost unlimited possibilities on what you could do with any of this. And keep in mind, you could also add some blocks over the other side of it again. Whatever seems to work for you there, or whatever you want to accomplish. So I could actually take these two beams, say do something like that. Just trying to kind of make a pattern out of it one way or another. Well, we'll just fill it in like that for now. So now you got something to look at on the inside. Now, one of the things though, if you're dealing with this with a single block row hull or walls, typically you're ending up with, you'll be able to do one side or the other, but you're not going to be able to do both sides. But sometimes you can find little things to do. Like I know that this row here is full blocks behind here. And there's not much else. So what I might do, say I'm really trying to get some detail into that inside area, but I did all this stuff on the outside. I might take a look and get rid of whatever I could on this side, which would be those two rows of blocks there, and try to find, just something I could do on the inside here. Of course, a little bit less options at this point, but say I wanted to add in some little vent thingies or something like that there, and there you go. And of course, I always, again, I could add another strip of something over the top of this, just for fun. Something like that there. So now we've got some detail on the inside of the wall and on the outside of the wall and on the ceiling. And of course, when you go through and texture all this, it just gives you a lot more texture options too, because now you can like texture this one texture and texture that a different texture and so on and so forth, until you get it all done. And this technique here, I think, is just really, really important. If you're going for detail. Now, granted, like if I were to jump in a survival game and wasn't planning on spawning prefabs or past creations, my my basic survival bases getting started up are terrible looking. They're box. And I threw parts in them, and that's pretty much the extent of it. But it's really quick and easy to build and easy to repair, all that fun stuff. It's basically, all this is for is if you want to make nice looking stuff. It doesn't make it have better function by any means. It's just trying to make it look prettier one way or another. So this whole concept here, I think, is just really, really important to do. And most creations can utilize that kind of thing. Now, it gets trickier though. Say you're into a lot of curves and angles already on your hull, and you don't really have the flat walls to start with. And I run into this an awful lot too, where I've got this big flat wedge area. And you've probably seen that when I was working on the Creel starter CV. That is something I do plan on getting back to soon as well. I didn't have a lot of time this last week to really do much EGS stuff, and I didn't make many videos last week either, so apologize for that. I'm just assembling like some wedge here right now. This is going to be a rough example to show though, but a lot of times I'll have ships designed this way, and then I try to think, well, what can I do to make this big wedge area look better. And it gets even more tricky with that. You know, I'm going to just build this out just a little bit more so I got a little bit more space to work with at least here. One sec. All right, so this is my base here. Say this wall is really big and flat and boring. Things that I typically look into do to try to make something like a big flat edge look better is sometimes, a lot of times actually, I will do the bevel method, and that is where I take a, like normally I would put in, you know, like this block would fit that, but rather than using that block, I will go up to the next one in the set like this, and so it has that flat edge on the side, and I showed that with some of those some of the past work back over there too. Just one technique at least on how to try to make this kind of stuff potentially look better. So now we've got this little line there, which I think already kind of looks better. You know, it's got that little bit of a crease, a little fold, looks kind of neat. Sometimes just simply cutting away some blocks in the pattern, especially the smaller ones, like this, you could add in like something there now too. Or in this case here, I will basically cut into it this way with like one step down in the blocks. Of course, this is going to cause you more block usage typically because you're kind of making holes in your wall while you're doing it. But, you know, if the looks work, you know, why not? And you know what? This one I'm going to actually bring back to that. So, yeah, now we got this weird little cut-in thing here. Let me get rid of those two corners there. And now I got this nice looking triangle. And this formation here, let me spawn something real quick to show you a real example of it. I did that on the Hephaestus spaceport. Almost to a T on what you just seen right there. See this little chunk here? There you go. That's basically what I did, and the whole reason for it was to try to get more detail into a big angled surface. And the other tricks were also utilized over here, trying to make extra rows rather than making this all like one angle. I split it up, even colored like one chunk different than the other sections, all to try to make it look prettier. So that's just another good thing to know when you're doing this kind of thing. So I mean, the possibilities are just so far out there. So much stuff you can do with this. As in other blocks on the block tutorial, if I go to the right place, the rest of them, I don't know. I guess there's not a whole lot I can tell you about them. If you understand the wedges and everything else, you can start to understand or you know, what some of these other blocks will do for you. One area that is of a lot of interest, though, is the page 5 corners and connectors. There's a lot of transition blocks here, and I do use them quite frequently, actually. Maybe not a whole lot per build, but you know, different ideas. Like for instance, sometimes I would want to convert a angle, or here, let's do another example here. Say I take a wedge block here. You know what? We're gonna build this out of wedges actually. So one of these. So I get over here and I'm like, hey, I want this to be a curve now. So you could go to one of these two angle to round blocks. Now there's a right and left, and that's cool. I guess. But I don't, in some cases, I don't understand exactly why there's a right and left. For instance, my case in point here is, yes, that block works, that's great. But let's say, here, I'm going to set up the inverse example over here. So we're going to have a couple of these going there. And then you would think that I'd need the opposite one for this side, which will work. Oh, but it's, the point is, it's not needed because I could actually go over here, reverse this one around, rotate it that way, and it works either direction. So in some cases, I don't actually know why they made a right and left block for those. Now there are some blocks that I do think should have a right and left version. That was also brought up in the comments on fixing the texture problem on the base set of wedges, which are these four guys over here. Is like this one particularly has a issue with right and left. Like for instance, if I were to put that block on that side and then put it, say, on the opposite side, when I go to texture this, you will see, and I'll just put a texture that kind of screams out there. I got the wrong block. Okay, this one's cool on both directions. Whoops. I guess it is the bigger of the two. My bad on that one. Whoops. All right. This one. So if I go to texture this side, you'll see that on one side of the block here, I get that over there. If I texture the other one, it fills in this whole top side. Now this can cause a lot of bigger issues because usually you'd have one version on one side of your ship or base or whatever and the other on the other side, and therefore when you texture them, they're going to look different on both sides and color different. Now this block here, I believe, should have a right and left version. That would fix the problem. And I think these other ones in the set are cool. It's just this one. So cut corner B really should have a right and left. And that would be really awesome. But some blocks, again, like these, they don't need a right and left, but they have one anyway. On this case, so on the smaller ramps, now these are pretty cool too. I love these blocks. That would go from a small wedge up into the curve like that. Now in this case, so if I did switch that around, here actually, again with the inverse way of doing that, and then I go, and I think I used this block. Let me just make sure I got that right. Okay, so yeah, now we're lined up exactly how we got that shown there. If I wanted to turn this one around and flip it that way, I can't. So this one does need a right and left, and it does have it. So that is cool. And then I can make that formation. So anyway, that's probably it for what I wanted to mostly show you for blocks. I'll try to keep on doing like some build tutorials of actual ships or work on different things to show more use of those. And the next parts of these videos are really going to dive more into the texturing and coloring of things. There's quite a lot to know about that too, or oil. And it's just my method too, because there's a lot of different methods of doing this kind of thing. I have certain ways that I've kind of developed over time, a lot of trial and error, and then I kind of expanded that out into different races eventually, with just kind of changing the rules around. But basically, like for instance, I got kind of a mental way that I texture human stuff. So, and it makes it easier the more you do of it, so I can texture stuff faster and try to keep on squeezing more and more detail out of textures. And the humans and the Martian texture scheme is actually very close, where the Creel is quite a lot different. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to show you some tricks on that next time, I think. Ways I go about looking at textures and which ones I pick for certain areas and why, and to try to come up with a look I'm trying to achieve in the end. Um, but that is about it for today. I'm just curious what you guys think of this ship over here. Of course, this isn't a working ship yet because it's missing too much stuff. But this was fun. Like I said, I wasn't really intending on building, and I was kind of one night I was just kind of sitting there, and I was like, hey, I got this CV core here, and I placed it, and then I just started building something, and then I don't know, ended up with that. Now I like it a lot. And want to finish that one up too, but probably not until after the Creel Starter CV is done, which I have not touched since the last video. Maybe tomorrow or Wednesday I will get cracking on that and do a video on that as well. Anyway, you all have yourself a good day, and I will see you later.